The mansion stood as a silent sentry against the rolling hills of the countryside, its grand facade washed in the soft hues of twilight. From the outside, it seemed a place frozen in time, an echo of bygone opulence where whispers of the past lingered in the air. As I drove up the winding gravel path, the car crunching softly under tire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a different world. The job was supposed to be straightforward. Document the last shoot in this historic mansion before it was sold to new owners who planned to renovate, erasing the vestiges of its prior uses, leaving only memories captured on film. An ordinary gig for a freelance photographer like me. My portfolio already contained an eclectic mix of assignments, but something about this particular project felt different, like the quiet before a storm, a tension that hummed just beneath the surface. Inside, the mansion was even more impressive, with sweeping staircases, high ceilings, and chandeliers that refracted the fading daylight into scattered patterns on the polished floors. The crew had already set up by the time I arrived, their equipment and cords snaking across the floor like the roots of some ancient tree. I met the director, a man named Roger, who was surprisingly soft-spoken and affable, not at all what I'd expected from someone in his line of work. He introduced me to the rest of the crew and the performers, all of whom seemed oddly subdued, as if the weight of the place itself pressed down upon them. As dusk settled into night and the shoot commenced, the mansion took on a different character. Shadows crept into corners, and the air seemed to cool inexplicably. I busied myself with capturing the atmosphere, focusing on the interplay of light and shadow, the way the camera lens seemed to sharpen the details into something almost hyper-real. But it wasn't long before I began to notice oddities, small things that seemed out of place. A flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision, a whispering draft that raised the hairs on my neck, though no windows were open. It wasn't until later, when the shoot was well underway, that the disturbances became impossible to ignore. I found myself standing in one of the upstairs rooms, the camera equipment heavy in my hands, when I heard it, a low murmur, just beneath the threshold of intelligibility. At first, I thought it was part of the film's ambient sound, but then I realized it was coming from somewhere else, deeper within the house. I glanced toward the others, but they continued their work, seemingly oblivious. Compelled by a curiosity I couldn't quite explain, I followed the sound through the dimly lit corridors. The mansion's layout was a labyrinth of rooms and staircases, each turn revealing more of its hidden depths. The sound grew clearer as I moved westward, resolving into fragmented voices. Yet, despite their clarity, I couldn't understand the words. They were like the echoes of an alien tongue, just outside the realm of familiarity. The farther I ventured, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The air felt charged, thick with an unseen energy that tugged at my sanity. I paused at the threshold of a room I hadn't seen before, its door ajar. Inside, the walls bore ornate paneling, and a large, dust-covered mirror dominated one side. The voices seemed to emanate from the mirror itself, as if it were a gateway to another world. But there was something else, an impression, a dark stain of memory that whispered of old sorrows and secrets best left undisturbed. I forced myself to back away, shaking off the spell that seemed to bind me to that spot. Returning to the crew, I tried to mention what I'd heard, but my words faltered, met with dismissive smiles and indulgent nods. Perhaps it was just the isolation of the place, they suggested, the way empty spaces played tricks on the mind. But their reassurances fell flat. unable to dispel the growing unease that coiled in my gut. As the night deepened, the disturbances escalated. Equipment malfunctioned inexplicably, lights flickered, and that pervasive whispering seemed to seep through the very walls. The performers appeared strained, their expressions taut with an anxiety that mirrored my own. It felt as if the mansion itself was awakening, shrugging off its slumber to reveal the face it wore in the dark. The climax of the evening came without warning. One of the performers, a young woman named Clara, froze mid-scene, her eyes wide and unseeing as she stared past us. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words only she could perceive. When she finally collapsed, the silence that followed was deafening, a void filled only by the sound of our own ragged breaths. We rushed to her side, panic electrifying the air, but she remained unresponsive, caught in some internal twilight from which we could not reach her. In the chaos, I found myself drawn back to the room with the mirror, as if some unseen force guided my steps. The voices were louder now, an insistent chorus that ebbed and flowed like the tide. Standing before the mirror, I saw not my own reflection, but a distorted tableau of the past. The mansion alive with laughter and music, its halls filled with elegantly dressed guests. A time before decay, before the whispers. I could feel the weight of their eyes, those phantom revelers, watching me with a strange intensity. As if I were the intruder, the one breaking the fragile barrier between now and then. And in that moment, clarity struck. The mansion was not merely haunted by the echoes of past occupants. It was a vessel, a repository of all the emotions, all the experiences it had ever contained. A place where the boundaries between reality and memory blurred, intertwining in a dance as old as the stones themselves. The others found me there, eventually, their voices cutting through the fog of my thoughts. They pulled me away, and together we left that room, the mirror's secrets receding into silence as the door clicked shut behind us. The chute was abandoned, the lingering atmosphere too oppressive to continue. As we gathered our things, the performers shaken and the crew unnaturally quiet, I couldn't help but steal one last glance up the grand staircase, its shadows deepening in the waning light. We departed the mansion under a shroud of uncertainty, the gravel crunching beneath our feet, a somber requiem for the night's events. In the days that followed, the experience clung to me like a second skin. I tried to rationalize it, to frame it as an overactive imagination fueled by stress and suggestion. But deep down, I knew the truth was more complex. I found myself returning to the photographs I'd taken, scrutinizing each image for something, anything, that might explain what had transpired. In the light of day, they appeared mundane, devoid of the strangeness that had permeated the night. Yet there was something in the frames, a tension, a sense of expectation, as if the images were waiting for their true story to unfold. The mansion was eventually sold, its new owners eager to erase its past and forge a new beginning. I never heard from the crew again, though I did receive a few emails from Roger, brief notes that hinted at his own unresolved fears. Clara, I learned from those messages, made a full recovery, though she had no memory of what happened that night. Perhaps, in forgetting, she found a measure of peace. But for me, the memories remain vivid, a haunting melody that plays in the quiet moments between waking and sleep. I often think back to that room with its mirror, wonder what it would show me now if given the chance. Would it reflect the mundane, or would it reveal the hidden truths that lurk in the spaces between light and shadow? Sometimes, when the night is particularly silent and the world feels just a bit unreal, I imagine I can hear the mansion's whispers, a distant chorus carried on the wind. I like to think that they're the echoes of that forgotten time, still lingering in the ether, waiting for someone to listen. The last shoot in the mansion was supposed to be a simple affair, a final chapter before the story changed. But like all stories worth telling, it left behind a question. What parts of our past remain with us, shaping our narrative in ways we can't quite understand? And how do we reconcile with the echoes of what once was, especially when they refuse to fade? As a photographer, I've always believed in capturing moments, freezing them in time for others to see. Yet, this encounter taught me that some moments are meant to remain fluid, slipping through our fingers like sand. Perhaps that's the true essence of the mansion's whispers, a reminder that some stories are best left unfinished, their resolutions hidden in the quiet spaces where memory and imagination converge.
The ice rink had always been a sanctuary of sorts for me. Its smooth, glistening surface, a blank canvas for my thoughts and motions. There was something about the cold air and the echo of skates slicing through ice that calmed my mind. It was a refuge from the chaos of everyday life, a place where I could find solace in the rhythmic sway and glide of my body. Located on the outskirts of town, the rink was an old building, its wooden beams groaning under the weight of years. Yet, it stood firm, like a monument to the winters that had come and gone. Its history whispered through the creaks in the floorboards and the distant hum of the cooling systems. During the day, the rink bustled with families and laughter, the air filled with the scent of hot chocolate from the nearby concession stand. But it was the evening visits I cherished most, when the ice lay empty and the world outside seemed to drift away. It was on one such evening that everything began to change. I had arrived just as the last of the families were leaving, their cheerful goodbyes echoing in the cavernous space. Soon the only sound was the steady scratch of my skates as I carved lazy circles into the ice. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic, and as always I lost myself in the cadence. But then it happened. The first disturbance. A sudden chill swept over me, far colder than the ambient temperature. It was as if the air had thickened, a sensation that stole my breath and left my heart racing inexplicably. I paused, glancing around the rink. The lights were dim, but steady, and there was nothing amiss in the shadows that pooled around the edges. I shook it off as a draft from the old building, adjusting my scarf and continuing my glide. Yet the chill lingered, a shadow at the edge of consciousness that refused to dissipate. The feeling was unsettling, but I forced myself to ignore it, tunneling into the familiar rhythm of skating. The next several evenings followed a similar pattern. The chill would return, a creeping cold that gnawed at my nerves. It was strange, but not alarming enough to deter me. I attributed it to the aging rink, convinced that it was a natural phenomenon. The mind, I told myself, plays tricks when left to wander. Yet in retrospect, I knew it was the beginning of something much more profound, a prelude to the events that would soon unfold. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. The inexplicable chill gave way to more tangible manifestations. It began with noises, soft murmurs and distant whispers that seemed to rise from the ice itself. At first, I dismissed them as echoes, sounds carried by the acoustics of the building, but they persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each visit. I found myself pausing mid-glide, straining to catch the words in the murmurs. They were elusive, always just out of reach, fading into silence whenever I focused too intently. An unsettling presence, hovered at the periphery of my awareness, filling the rink with an almost palpable tension. One evening, as I circled the ice, I caught sight of something in the reflection of the plexiglass surrounding the rink. A flicker of movement, just a shadow, but it was enough to send a jolt of fear through me. I spun around, but the ice was empty, save for my own reflection, warped and distorted in the curved glass. I left the rink that night with a sense of unease that clung to me, a nagging certainty that I was not alone. I considered telling someone, but what would I say? That the rink was haunted by shadows and whispers? It seemed ridiculous, even to me. Yet, whatever skepticism I clung to was shattered the following week. The rink was deserted as usual, the air heavy with the scent of fresh ice. As I skated, the whispers returned, louder than before, and this time I could almost discern words, a fragmented chorus of voices intertwined and overlapping. And then the temperature plummeted. The chill was so intense that my breath fogged in front of me, and I could see my exhalations lingering in the air. I stopped abruptly, my heart pounding as the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony that echoed through the rink. It was overwhelming, a storm of sound that made my head spin. In the midst of the chaos, I felt a presence, as if someone or something was standing right behind me. I turned, my eyes wide with terror, expecting to see a figure looming in the shadows. But there was nothing, only the silent expanse of ice and my own frantic reflection staring back at me. I fled the rink, my skates clattering against the boards in my haste. Outside, the night air was a welcome relief, the chill a stark contrast to the unnatural cold within. I leaned against the building, my breath coming in ragged gasps, trying to make sense of what I had experienced. I couldn't shake the feeling that the rink was trying to communicate, that the whispers held a message meant for me. But why? And what had triggered the sudden escalation? My mind whirled with questions, but no answers came. Determined to understand, I returned the next evening, armed with a small portable recorder. If there were voices, I reasoned, perhaps I could capture them and make sense of the haunting cacophony. The rink was as I had left it, still and silent, the lights casting long shadows across the ice. As I skated, the whispers resumed, and I fumbled with the recorder, my fingers numb from the cold. I pressed record and skated slowly, trying to act as naturally as possible, despite the anxiety gnawing at me. The whispers filled the air, a haunting melody that ebbed and flowed with my movements. After what felt like an eternity, I stopped the recording and skated to the edge of the rink, my heart heavy with apprehension. I played back the recording, straining to hear the voices I had captured. At first, there was nothing, just the soft scrape of skates on ice. But then, faintly, the whispers emerged, as real as they had been in the rink. The words were clearer now, fragments of phrases overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Cold, trapped, remember, they said. My blood ran cold as I listened, unable to comprehend the implications. The voices were unmistakably human. But what were they trying to say? I spent the night poring over the recording, replaying it until the words were etched into my mind. Sleep eluded me, my thoughts tangled with fear and curiosity. What had happened here? What memories were these voices trying to convey? Determined to uncover the truth, I began to research the history of the rink. It was an arduous task, sifting through old newspaper archives and town records, but persistence paid off, and I discovered a tragic story hidden in the annals of time. Decades earlier, the rink had been the site of a terrible accident. A group of teenagers, eager to enjoy a late-night skate, had broken in after hours. The night had been bitterly cold, and the rink's cooling system had malfunctioned, causing a sudden, severe drop in temperature. Trapped inside, unable to escape the freezing conditions, the teenagers had succumbed to the cold. The incident had been hushed up, a tragedy buried beneath layers of silence and time. But the voices, the restless spirits, remained, trapped in a perpetual cycle of remembrance. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the rink, determined to help the spirits find peace. It felt surreal, standing there on the ice, knowing the history beneath my feet. I placed my hand on the cold surface, a silent acknowledgement of the lives lost here. I began to speak aloud, my voice echoing softly in the empty rink. I told the spirits I knew their story, that I understood their pain. I spoke of remembrance, of peace, hoping my words would reach them. The air around me seemed to shift, the chill lessening as I spoke. The whispers returned, softer now, as if responding to my words. "Thank you," they murmured, and then, slowly, they faded into silence. The rink felt different. The oppressive tension lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. I left that night with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of closure. The spirits, it seemed, had found the peace they sought, but the memory of their whispers lingered, a reminder of the rink's haunted past. In the months that followed, I continued to visit the rink, the solace I had once found there, now tinged with a deeper understanding. The whispers never returned, but the chill remained, a gentle reminder of the encounter, a testament to the lives that lingered on in memory. The rink, with its wooden beams and storied past, remained a place of refuge, a sanctuary where the echoes of the past intertwined with the present. And though the spirits had found peace, the memory of their voices stayed with me. A haunting melody that resonated in the stillness, a lingering fear that whispered through the chill of the ice.
The sun was setting with a golden glow, casting long shadows across the park, where the trees, in full bloom, formed a natural canopy over the winding paths. I often found solace in this place, a quiet retreat from the hustle and bustle of my daily life. The park was an oasis of peace, with its gentle rustling leaves and the occasional chirping of birds that created a symphony of serenity. The bench where I sat was my favorite spot, a rustic wooden seat that overlooked the small pond shimmering under the fading light. I've always been drawn to this particular bench, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. It seemed to possess an inexplicable magnetism that made me return time and again. Its worn surface spoke of countless visitors, each leaving behind whispers of their stories etched into its grain. Here, I would often ponder the trivialities of my day, the memories of life's little moments that seemed to blend into one another. It was during one of these reflective moments that I first noticed something peculiar, something that would unravel my perception of reality. I was lost in thought, watching the ducks glide across the pond, when I saw her. She was sitting at the far end of the bench, a woman dressed in an old-fashioned gown that seemed oddly out of place in the modern world. Her attire, a delicate lace dress in shades of cream and light blue, seemed to belong to a different era. She appeared as though she had stepped out of a painting from the early 20th century. Our eyes met, and a chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from a sense of recognition that I couldn't quite comprehend. I blinked, convinced that my mind was playing tricks on me, and when I opened my eyes again, she was gone. The space beside me was empty, and the park was as tranquil as ever, with no sign of the mysterious visitor. I shook my head, dismissing the vision as a trick of the fading light and my overactive imagination. In the days that followed, I found myself returning to the bench more frequently, hoping to encounter the enigmatic woman once more. It became a compulsion, a strange obsession that lingered at the back of my mind. Each visit was punctuated by a peculiar sense of anticipation, a feeling that something extraordinary was just waiting to unfold. It wasn't long before the inexplicable occurrences began to escalate. On a particularly cool evening, as the first hints of autumn began to tint the leaves, I felt a sudden drop in temperature around the bench. The air grew colder, and the world around me seemed to dim, as though a veil had been drawn over my surroundings. I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering, when I caught sight of her again. This time, she appeared closer, sitting just a few feet away. She was gazing at me with an intensity that seemed to pierce through my very being. Her eyes were a striking shade of blue, and they held a depth that suggested an unfathomable wisdom. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask her who she was, but no words came out. Instead, I felt a strange sensation, as though my own memories were being sifted through, examined by an unseen force. It was then that I realized she was not entirely of this world. Her presence was ethereal, her form slightly translucent, as if she were woven from the threads of time itself. There was a fleeting moment of connection, a bridge formed between two worlds, before she vanished once again, leaving me alone with the encroaching night. As the days turned into weeks, the boundary between reality and imagination began to blur. I found myself questioning the nature of time, of memory, and of the very fabric of existence. My once mundane life was now peppered with episodes of haunting familiarity and eerie visitations. Each time I sat on the bench, I was transported to a realm where past and present seemed to coexist, where the linear progression of time was a mere illusion. It wasn't just the woman who haunted my thoughts. I began to experience vivid flashes of memories that weren't my own, scenes from a bygone era that played out with unnerving clarity. I saw the park as it once was, a lush garden filled with people in Edwardian attire, strolling leisurely, their laughter echoing through the air. I could smell the faint aroma of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, hear the distant melody of a piano drifting from an open window. These visions were accompanied by a profound sense of melancholy, an overwhelming longing for a time I had never lived through. The park, once a sanctuary of peace, became a conduit for something otherworldly, a portal through which fragments of forgotten history seeped into the present. Driven by an insatiable curiosity and a desire for answers, I began to research the history of the park and the surrounding area. I discovered that it was once the site of a grand estate, owned by a prominent family in the early 1900s. The estate had been a hub of social activity, hosting grand parties and gatherings, until a tragic accident claimed the lives of several family members, leaving the place abandoned. One name kept recurring in my research: Margaret Kensington, the youngest daughter of the estate owner. She was described as a vivacious woman with a keen interest in the arts, whose life was cut short in the accident. Her description matched the appearance of the mysterious woman I had been seeing. It seemed impossible, yet everything pointed to the fact that she was the specter that haunted the bench, the guardian of lost memories. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the park, determined to communicate with Margaret, to understand why she lingered and what she sought. As I sat on the bench, I focused on the connection I felt with her, the invisible thread that bound us across time. The air grew still, the world around me fading into a sepia-toned vision of the past, until she appeared once more. This time I was ready. I addressed her with the respect and reverence one would afford to a timeless soul. "Margaret," I said softly, "why do you remain here? What is it that keeps you tethered to this place?" Her expression softened, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and gratitude. She spoke, her voice a gentle whisper carried on the breeze. "I am the keeper of memories, the custodian of moments that refuse to be forgotten. This place, this bench, is the anchor for all that once was, a repository of emotions and experiences that transcend time." I realized then that Margaret was not merely a ghost, but a living embodiment of history, a bridge between the past and the present. Her presence was a reminder of the impermanence of life, of the fleeting nature of time that binds us all. She lingered to safeguard the memories of those who had come before, to ensure that their stories were not lost to the annals of oblivion. We sat together for what felt like an eternity, sharing a silent communion that transcended words. The park, with its timeless beauty, became a tapestry of intertwined destinies, each thread weaving a narrative that spanned generations. I understood now that the bench was more than a seat. It was a threshold to a world where time was both a friend and a foe, a conduit for the eternal dance of memories that echoed through eternity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the park, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I knew that Margaret's vigil would continue, that she would remain a sentinel of lost memories, guarding the stories of the past with quiet dignity. And though I could not remain with her forever, I left the park with a renewed appreciation for the beauty of impermanence, for the delicate tapestry of life that connects us all, regardless of time or place. Yet, the lingering fear remained, a subtle, unsettling awareness of the thin veil that separates our world from the spectral realm, a reminder that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the shadows of our memories, in the whispered echoes of those who came before, and in the silent watch of a solitary spirit, bound to a bench that bridges the chasm of time.
The coffee shop was my sanctuary. Nestled on the corner of Elm Street, it was a quaint little place with just the right blend of charm and anonymity. The soft hum of conversation, the comforting aroma of freshly ground beans, and the familiar unchanging playlist worked together to create a cocoon that shielded me from the chaos of the outside world. I frequented the shop almost daily, losing myself in the gentle whirl of the ceiling fans and the rhythmic whir of the espresso machine. The baristas knew me by name, and I knew their habitual smiles, often trading friendly banter as I waited for my order. I would settle into my usual spot by the window, a small table with a perfect view of the street, where I could observe the unremarkable flow of life. Hurried businessmen to leisurely dog walkers. It was a routine that provided a sense of control and predictability, a balm for my restless mind. One rainy afternoon as I settled in, a stranger caught my eye. He sat alone at the table opposite mine, cloaked in a long brown coat that seemed out of place amidst the snug atmosphere. The coat was worn, its fabric fraying at the edges, and looked like it had a history of its own, maybe more stories than I could ever imagine. His presence was a curious anomaly, introducing an unfamiliar tension to the air. He was an older man, his features obscured by the shadow of his collar and a wide-brimmed hat. There was something peculiar about him that I couldn't quite place. He sat quietly, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup. Yet his eyes remained fixed on me, unblinking, intense. It was as though he could see right through the veil of normalcy I had carefully constructed around myself. I dismissed the feeling, attributing it to my imagination, which had a tendency to wander when left unchecked. I returned to my book, forcing my attention back to the narrative, trying to ignore the prickling sensation that crawled across my skin whenever I glanced up and met his gaze. The rain continued to patter against the window, a soothing symphony that usually calmed me. But today it felt like a backdrop to a scene I had no control over. The stranger remained in his seat for hours, outlasting the usual patrons, as though he were waiting for something, or someone. Days turned into weeks, and the man in the brown coat became a fixture in the coffee shop. He arrived at the same time as I did, settled into his seat with an unsettling precision, and remained there until I left. Each day, his presence grew more oppressive, like an unspoken challenge. There was no verbal exchange between us, no acknowledgement beyond the weight of his stare, yet I felt inexorably drawn to him, my curiosity tinged with an unshakable apprehension. I tried to explain it away, rationalize it as some form of eccentricity or loneliness. Perhaps he was a writer, weaving intricate stories in his mind, and I was merely a character ensnared in his narrative. Still, My attempts at logic did little to quell the growing unease that simmered beneath the surface of my thoughts. One evening, as the coffee shop began to empty, I noticed something peculiar. The lights flickered intermittently, casting strange shadows that danced along the walls. The air seemed to thicken, laden with the weight of an impending storm, despite the clear skies outside. The man in the brown coat remained unmoved, as though he were a part of the very fabric of the shop. I tried to dismiss it as a quirk of the building, but the sensation of being watched, of being evaluated, persisted, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. My dreams became haunted by faceless figures in dark corridors, echoes of whispered conversations that faded before I could comprehend their meaning. The baristas seemed unaware of the man's presence, serving him with the same casual indifference they afforded every other customer. Yet, I couldn't shake the suspicion that they were merely playing a role, as if the entire establishment had become a stage set for some unseen drama. As my discomfort grew, I considered confronting him, demanding to know why he watched me with such unwavering attention. But something held me back, an instinctual fear that whispered warnings in the language of survival. Instead, I decided to reach out, subtly, in the hope that it might prompt some form of communication. The next day, I arrived earlier than usual, choosing a different table, closer to the counter. Further from him, I tried to catch the eye of the staff, seeking some acknowledgement of the stranger's presence, but their smiles remained fixed, oblivious. When the man arrived, he paused, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me. Without hesitation, he moved to his usual seat, his expression unchanging. Despite the distance, his gaze was as piercing as ever, a silent invitation, or perhaps a challenge. I took a deep breath, mustering the courage to act. I wrote a note on a napkin, a simple message. "Who are you?" With trembling hands, I folded it and waited for an opportunity. When he momentarily glanced away, I placed the note on his table, a bridge across the chasm of silence that separated us. He considered the note for a long moment, then looked up, meeting my eyes with an intensity that made my heart race. Slowly he unfolded the napkin, reading the message before tucking it into his coat pocket without a word. He nodded once, a gesture that felt oddly reassuring, and then returned to his vigil. The lines of his face softened ever so slightly. I left the coffee shop that day with a mix of relief and trepidation, unsure of what response, if any, would follow. However, the following morning, a new note awaited me at my usual table. It was written on a similar napkin, the handwriting neat and precise. "We've met before." Puzzled, I racked my brain, trying to recall any previous encounter, but my memory offered no clues. The familiarity of his gaze had become almost comforting, yet the mystery of his words only deepened the enigma. Days passed, each one marked by the exchange of cryptic notes. The conversations were sparse, often more questions than answers, but they formed a connection, a tenuous thread that bound us in a shared secrecy. The atmosphere in the coffee shop shifted subtly, as though we were the only real elements in a world of shadows. And then, one day, the man in the brown coat did not arrive. His absence was palpable. The space he usually occupied an unwelcome void. I waited, my eyes drawn compulsively to the door, but he did not appear. Instead, the world outside seemed to unravel. The light took on a peculiar hue, casting the street in shades of gray that felt unnatural and disconcerting. I left the coffee shop early, unnerved by the sudden change, and as I stepped outside, I felt a chill that seeped into my bones. The streets were deserted, a silence hanging in the air that was thick and suffocating. The world felt suspended, as if holding its breath, waiting for something to break the precarious stillness. The next day he returned, his presence both a relief and a reminder of the inexorable connection we shared. He slid a note across the table before I could sit down, his expression unreadable. "You need to remember," it read. The words echoed in my mind, a command that stirred something deep within me. Images flickered at the edge of my consciousness, fragmented, elusive memories that evaded comprehension. I felt an overwhelming urge to uncover the truth, to peel back the layers of time and understand the significance of our encounter. Driven by this newfound determination, I immersed myself in the world of the coffee shop, seeking answers among the familiar faces and forgotten corners. The baristas, the patrons, the very building itself, all seemed imbued with a hidden significance I had overlooked. I scrutinized every detail, desperate to unravel the tapestry of events that had led to this moment. And then, like a veil lifting, it came to me. A rush of memories flooded my mind. The image of a younger me sitting at a similar table in a different coffee shop on a day much like this. The man in the brown coat had been there too, a constant in the background of my life, appearing at significant junctures, a silent witness to my journey. The realization was both unsettling and strangely comforting. He was not a stranger, but a guardian of sorts, a keeper of memories lost to time. His presence was a reminder of the moments that had shaped me, a tether to the past that had brought me to this point. As the pieces fell into place, I felt a profound sense of clarity. The fear that had clung to me dissipated, replaced by a deep understanding of the interconnectedness of events. The coffee shop, the man in the brown coat, the cryptic notes each played a part in the intricate dance of fate. I approached him with a newfound certainty, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. He nodded, a knowing smile touching his lips, as if to say that my journey of discovery was complete. Yet there was a lingering sense of mystery, an unspoken promise that our paths would cross again. The man in the brown coat left the coffee shop that day, his final note resting on the table like a parting gift. It reads simply, "Until next time." As I sat there, the familiarity of the scene returned, the hum of conversation and the aroma of coffee enveloping me once more. The sense of unease had transformed into a quiet acceptance. The knowledge that some mysteries were meant to be savored rather than solved. The world outside resumed its rhythm, and I watched as the ordinary unfolded with a newfound appreciation. The coffee shop remained my sanctuary, a place where the past and present intersected, tethered by the enigmatic presence of the man in the brown coat. And though he was gone, his shadow lingered, a reminder that the extraordinary often lay hidden in the most mundane of places.
The neighborhood had always been a conundrum of contrasting elements. Rows of aging houses sat stoically, their faded facades masking the vibrant lives within. Trees lined the streets, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind as the sun cast long shadows on the cracked sidewalks. It was a place where crime lingered like an unwelcome specter, yet life persisted with a determined rhythm. Children played in the streets, their laughter a temporary balm against the undercurrent of unease. Here, amidst this delicate balance of normalcy and dread, lived tall Frank. I first noticed him during my morning walks, a habit I'd adopted in an attempt to reclaim some semblance of peace in my life. Tall Frank stood out not just because of his height, which gave him a peculiar, almost looming presence, but also because of his attire, always the same long, dark coat, regardless of the weather. His face was often obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, casting a shadow that made his features difficult to discern. He moved with a kind of deliberate slowness, like someone who had all the time in the world. and his path often intersected with mine. Our neighborhood wasn't particularly welcoming to strangers. Anyone new or different was viewed with suspicion, and Tall Frank was no exception. Whispers followed him, speculation about who he was and where he came from. Some said he was a drifter, others suggested he was hiding from something or someone. Yet, despite the furtive glances and hushed conversations, no one seemed willing to approach him directly. His presence was an anomaly, a ripple in the fabric of our everyday lives. The first time Tall Frank and I exchanged words was on one of those quiet mornings when the world felt like it was holding its breath. The usual cacophony of distant traffic and barking dogs was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. As I passed him, he stopped and turned towards me, his movements so fluid and silent that I almost didn't notice. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep and calm, resonating with an unexpected warmth. Surprised, I returned the greeting, suddenly unsure of what to do with my hands, which hovered awkwardly between offering a handshake or staying glued to my pockets. His face was still partially hidden, but I could make out enough to see his eyes, a startling blue that seemed both ancient and youthful. "You walk every day," he observed. "Yeah, it helps clear my mind," I replied, offering a small, uncertain smile. He nodded, as if this was the most logical thing in the world. "It's good to see someone appreciating the mornings," he said, and then continued on his way without another word. Our interactions became more frequent after that, small nods or brief exchanges that punctuated the silence of our encounters. Despite his unsettling presence, there was something undeniably intriguing about Tall Frank. He seemed to drift through the neighborhood like a shadow, unnoticed by most, yet somehow aware of everything. Then the disturbances began, subtle at first, like hesitant murmurs at the edge of consciousness. A series of break-ins rattled the neighborhood, each more brazen than the last. People spoke in hushed tones about how the area was changing, how everything felt slightly off-kilter. Some blamed Tall Frank, though there was no evidence to support such claims. He was, after all, merely a mysterious figure in a place that craved explanations. I found myself caught in a crossfire of suspicion and curiosity. The thought of confronting Tall Frank crossed my mind, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the way he seemed to blend into the very shadows themselves, or the unsettling feeling that he knew more than he let on. Instead, I observed from a distance, piecing together fragments of his routine in hopes of understanding his intentions. One night, unable to sleep, I took to the streets, the cool air a welcome relief from the oppressive weight of insomnia. The neighborhood was transformed under the cloak of darkness, familiar landmarks rendered strange and unfamiliar. As I walked, I noticed a figure ahead, moving with purpose. It was Tall Frank, his coat billowing like a specter in the night. Intrigued, I followed at a safe distance. He led me to a small park at the edge of the neighborhood, a place I rarely visited. It was an odd little space, tucked away like a forgotten secret, its benches worn and its paths overgrown. Tall Frank stopped near a cluster of trees, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. He stood there for several minutes, simply staring into the darkness. I watched, transfixed, as he reached into his coat and retrieved something small and metallic. He placed it on the ground before turning and disappearing into the night. After he left, I approached the spot, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. The object he had left was a small, intricately designed music box. Curious, I picked it up and turned the key. The tune it played was hauntingly beautiful, filling the air with a melody that seemed to resonate deep within me. It was both comforting and unsettling, like a lullaby sung by a ghost. The days that followed were marked by a tense anticipation. The break-ins continued, their frequency increasing, and the neighborhood's collective anxiety grew palpable. Yet, amidst this turmoil, Tall Frank appeared unchanged, moving through the streets with the same calm, detached demeanor. Our interactions resumed, punctuated by the occasional cryptic remark or knowing glance. It was as if he was aware of the chaos around us, but chose not to acknowledge it. The music box remained a mystery, its significance eluding me. I kept it hidden, unsure whether to reveal its existence to anyone else. It was my secret link to Tall Frank, a tangible connection to his enigmatic presence. One evening, as dusk settled like a shroud over the city, I encountered Tall Frank again. He was standing at the edge of a derelict playground, his silhouette framed against the dying light. There was something different about him this time, a tension in his posture that set my nerves on edge. "Do you ever wonder about the stories these places could tell?" he asked, his voice carrying an uncharacteristic edge. "Sometimes," I admitted. "There's always more than meets the eye, isn't there?" He nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "People see what they want to see. Often, they miss the most important things." Our conversation was cut short by the sound of sirens in the distance, drawing closer with each passing second. Tall Frank tensed, his gaze shifting towards the source of the noise. Before I could say anything, he turned and walked away, his long strides quickly swallowing the distance between us in the encroaching chaos. That night, sleep eluded me once more. My mind was a torrent of unanswerable questions and half-formed theories. I was on the cusp of something, yet the full picture eluded me like a dream forgotten upon waking. As the hours slipped by, the music box's tune played softly in my mind, a recurring theme in the symphony of uncertainty. The following day dawned with an unusual heaviness, the air thick with a sense of impending change. I went about my routine, but the usual comforts offered no solace. As I walked, the neighborhood felt different, as if holding its breath for an unseen revelation. Then came the climax, unexpected and shocking in its simplicity. As I rounded a corner, I found a group of neighbors gathered outside one of the houses. Their voices were a mixture of relief and disbelief. Word had spread quickly, the break-ins had been solved. An arrest had been made, the perpetrator caught red-handed in another part of town. I felt an odd mixture of emotions, a blend of satisfaction and confusion. Among the crowd, I noticed Tall Frank standing apart, observing with a serene detachment. Our eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. There was a knowing look in his gaze, a silent acknowledgement of something shared between us. Before I could approach him, he turned and walked away, his figure receding into the distance. I wanted to call out to ask him about the music box, about the stories he hinted at, but the words caught in my throat. He disappeared once more into the shadows, leaving nothing but echoes in his wake. Though the immediate threat had passed, a lingering fear remained, woven into the fabric of the neighborhood. We were left with the unsettling realization that we never truly knew those who walked among us. Tall Frank's presence, though enigmatic, had offered a peculiar form of comfort, a reminder of the complexity of human nature. In the days that followed, I resumed my walks, hoping to catch a glimpse of him once more, but he was gone. The music box, however, remained on my shelf, a silent guardian of secrets untold. Its melody, when played, was a gentle reminder of the mysteries that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. Reflecting on it all, I couldn't help but wonder about the hidden stories, the unseen connections that shaped our lives. Tall Frank had been a stranger, an enigma, yet his actions suggested a depth of understanding that transcended the superficial judgments of our community. Perhaps, in his own quiet way, he had guided us through the storm, his benevolence masked by the shadows from which he emerged. Life in the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm, albeit with a newfound wariness. The break-ins faded into memory, yet the impact of Tall Frank's presence lingered. We had been touched by something profound, a reminder of the thin veil separating the known from the unknown. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that Tall Frank's story isn't over, that somewhere in the city, beneath the canopy of normalcy, he watches and waits. Perhaps one day our paths will cross again, and the music box will play its haunting tune, echoing the mysteries that bind us all.
In a small town tucked away behind the bustling life of the city, there was an abandoned factory that loomed like the forgotten skeleton of an industrial age long past. It stood on the outskirts, surrounded by overgrown weeds and rusting fences, a monument of decay left untouched by time. Yet, despite its dilapidated state, there were whispers about the place. Murmurs that only grew louder in the clandestine corners of the underground music scene. It was said that if you listen closely, you might hear the haunting melodies of MVSH, a band whose music was as intoxicating as it was enigmatic. I first heard about MVSH from a friend, a fellow enthusiast of the obscure who lived for the thrill of discovering something hidden, something forbidden. "You won't believe it until you hear it for yourself," he said, his eyes alight with a strange fervor. "They play there, in the factory. But it's not just music. It's something else. Something you have to experience." Intrigued, and perhaps a little too eager to escape the monotony of my day-to-day life, I decided to seek out the factory one cool autumn evening. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of leaves in their final throes of color, the sky a deepening indigo speckled with the first stars of the night. As I walked the path leading to the factory, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a story much larger than myself, a narrative woven by shadows and whispers. The factory loomed larger as I approached, its windows shattered and its once proud facade now a canvas of graffiti and neglect. The entrance was ajar, inviting yet foreboding, and as I stepped inside, the echoes of my footsteps reverberated through the cavernous space, mingling with the distant, ethereal strains of music. It was a sound like no other, a haunting melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Inside, the factory was transformed into a world of shadows and light. Candles flickered in forgotten corners, casting long, wavering shadows that danced to the rhythm of the music. A small crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of awe and reverie, all eyes fixed on the makeshift stage where the band played. And there they were, MVSH. 4 figures cloaked in darkness, their features obscured by the dim light, yet their presence undeniable. Their music was a tapestry of sound, woven from threads of haunting melodies and pulsating rhythms. It resonated deep within, stirring emotions I didn't know I possessed, emotions I couldn't name. There was something almost otherworldly about it, as if the music reached into the very essence of the soul, revealing truths long buried. I was entranced, as were those around me, each of us caught in the web of their performance. Yet it wasn't long before I noticed something peculiar. The music had a strange effect. People seemed to lose themselves in it, swaying as if under a spell. I watched as a young woman next to me closed her eyes, her expression one of serene bliss before her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground. Alarmed, I moved to help her, but she was not the only one. Elsewhere in the crowd, others had begun to sway dangerously, some crumpling like puppets with their strings cut. The music continued, relentless and unyielding, and I found myself caught in its grip. It was intoxicating, pulling me deeper with each note, until the world around me blurred, and I was adrift in a sea of sound. Panic mingled with the euphoria, and I fought to stay grounded, to resist the pull that threatened to consume me entirely. Then, abruptly, the music stopped. The band stood silent, their instruments still, and an eerie quiet settled over the factory. Those who had fallen began to stir, groggy and disoriented, as if waking from a dream. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest, and for a moment, I could have sworn the band was watching me, their shadowed eyes piercing the dimness like specters in the night. The crowd began to disperse, whispering among themselves, their voices hushed and tinged with confusion and awe. As I made my way out, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that the music had not just touched our souls, but had taken something from us, leaving a hollow echo in its wake. Days passed, and I couldn't rid myself of the lingering unease that clung to me like a shadow. The music of MVSH haunted my thoughts, playing on a loop in the recesses of my mind. I found myself humming their melodies absent-mindedly, their rhythms pounding like a second heartbeat. It was as if the factory had imprinted itself upon me, a vestige of the night that refused to fade. Others who had been at the performance spoke of similar experiences, a shared sense of disquiet that grew with each passing day. We met in secret, exchanging stories and theories, trying to make sense of what had happened. Some spoke of feeling drained, their energy sapped, while others confessed to vivid dreams where the music played ceaselessly, guiding them through landscapes both alien and familiar. It was during one of these clandestine meetings that I learned of a more disturbing rumor of people who had attended the performances and never returned, vanishing as if swallowed by the shadows. The idea chilled me to the core, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was a darker purpose behind MVSH's music, an insidious intent veiled beneath the beauty of their art. Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to the factory. This time, armed with a resolve I hadn't possessed before. The night was thick with fog, the moon a pale lantern in the sky, as I retraced my steps to the hollowed building. The factory stood silent, its presence looming like a specter in the mist, and I hesitated at the threshold, a chill creeping down my spine. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, the silence a tangible force that pressed against my skin. I moved through the shadows, my footsteps careful and deliberate, guided by an instinct that defied logic. As I approached the stage, I saw them. MVSH Sam in the darkness, their instruments silent, their faces obscured by the veil of night. They did not move as I approached, their stillness unnerving in its intensity. I felt their eyes upon me, a palpable weight that seemed to pierce through the shadows. My heart raced, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs as I stepped closer, a question forming on my lip. "Wait," I breathed, the word barely a whisper in the cavernous space. "What is this?" For a long moment there was only silence, the kind that stretches and bends, threatening to break. Then, the figure at the center of the band shifted, stepping into a shaft of moonlight that spilled through a broken window. His face was half midden, but there was a glint of something ancient in his eyes, a knowing that transcended time. "We play to reveal," he said, his voice a low, melodic rumble, "to unmask the hidden truths within." His words were cryptic, yet they resonated with a strange clarity, as if lifting a veil that had been draped across my mind. In that moment, I understood. MVSH's music was a catalyst, a means to unveil the secrets we kept hidden, even from ourselves. But at what cost? Before I could ask more, the music began again, soft and insistent, wrapping around me like a living thing. The factory transformed, the shadows weaving into intricate patterns that danced in time with the melody. I felt the pull once more, the seductive lure of the music, and I knew I had to resist, or risk being consumed entirely. The urge to surrender was overwhelming, to let the music guide me into the depths of my own consciousness. But I held on, clinging to the fragments of myself that remained, refusing to be a vessel for their truths. I stumbled back, away from the stage, my breath ragged and my heart a wild thing in my chest. As I retreated, the music swelled, reaching a crescendo that reverberated through the very walls of the factory. A siren song that promised knowledge and despair in equal measure. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of sound and shadow, and I fought against the tide, struggling to maintain my grip on reality. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the music stopped. The silence was deafening, a void that rushed to fill the space the sound had occupied. I stood alone in the darkness. The figures of MVSH faded into the shadows, their presence now only a memory, etched into the fabric of the night. I left the factory behind, the echoes of the music still reverberating in my mind, a haunting refrain that lingered long after the last note had faded. The town seemed unchanged, oblivious to the secrets that lay hidden in its midst, yet I knew I would never see it the same way again. The factory, the band, the music, they had left a mark upon me, a reminder of the fragility of reality and the thin veil that separates the known from the unknown. The days turned to weeks, and the memory of that night remained a constant companion, a shadow at the edge of my thoughts. Others who had attended the performance spoke of feeling altered, as if their very essence had been touched by the music, leaving them forever changed. Some embraced it, viewing it as a gift, while others, like me, struggled with the unease that ebbed and flowed like a tide. I never returned to the factory, nor did I seek out MVSH again, though the temptation lingered, a siren call that whispered in the quiet moments. The band seemed to vanish as mysteriously as they had appeared, their music now the stuff of legend among those who dared to speak of it. And even as life resumed its ordinary course, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watched, that the shadows had eyes and the music ears. Each night, as I lay in the stillness, I could hear it, the faint strains of a melody carried on the wind, a ghostly echo of a night that had changed everything. And so I lived in a state of uneasy truce, forever marked by the band from the shadows, their music a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil, waiting to be uncovered by those brave enough or foolish enough to seek them out.